Hey, this chapter is from The 10 Girls Who Made History by Irene Howard, and today we're looking at Mary Jane Kinnard. The little girl looked around the circle of her brothers and sisters. Their faces all reflected the flickering of the coal fire, and their eyes seemed to dance with the light from it. There were 6 in the family, and she was the youngest of them all by several years. It was Christmas time, and they had gathered at their grandparents' where they could spend some time together. Sir Gerard Noel and Lady Barnum loved their grandchildren dearly. "It's very sad," Mary Jane said. "You can all remember Papa and Mama, and I can't remember them at all." Her oldest sister turned in her direction. "I was very upset when they died," she said, "and I remember feeling especially sad for you because I knew you wouldn't have any memories of them." "Tell me about them," the child pleaded. "Then I can imagine that I knew them." Mary Jane's oldest sister took charge. "Let's go round the circle and tell something that we remember about our parents. You start," she said to her brother. "Papa was a banker," the lad said. "And he always wore very smart clothes," said the next one along. "Mama was gentle and kind," Mary Jane's sister added. "And she was quite a serious person," commented her brother. "Mama was very kind," the oldest sister said. "In fact, Mary Jane, although you don't remember her, you are very like Mama. You're gentle and kind and serious, so despite not knowing her at all, there is something of Mama in you." That night, Mary Jane went to bed happier than she had felt for some time, because over the weeks that had gone before, she had thought a lot about not knowing her parents. "The holidays are over now, I'm afraid," said Miss Holloway, "and I think we should start today with your piano lesson." Mary Jane smiled at her governess. She had played the piano for her brothers and sisters many times over the holiday and had learnt a new tune. Sitting at the piano, she began to play. Miss Holloway's eyes opened wide, then a smile played on her face. "Who taught you that tune?" she asked. "My brother William," the child said. "He said it would be a nice surprise for you." "He was quite right," laughed Miss Holloway, "and I would really enjoy hearing it over again." Happy that she was pleased, Mary Jane settled back at the piano and began to play. Mary Jane's brother, who had taught her the tune, came into the room as his little sister played. "Well done, Twinkle," he said, clapping at her performance. The little girl's face broke into a wide smile. Her older brother and sisters may have had homes and families of their own, but there was something special about their times together at Grandma and Grandpa's. It was Mary Jane's home, and she loved it, but she loved it even more when all the family was there, and she adored William, even if he did call her that awful pet name. "I suggest you write your thank you letters this afternoon," Miss Holloway said as they finished the morning's schoolwork. "You have one to write to your godmother and one to your uncle." Although Mary was a clever child, she neither read nor wrote quickly, so the writing of 2 thank you letters took some time. After she had finished telling her godmother how much she liked the gift she had sent her, there was still a lot of empty paper on the page. As she thought what else she could say, an idea came to her mind, and she wrote it down before it escaped. "I hope that whenever you call, I shall be able to say the catechism, Bible questions and answers, perfectly." Then, signing her name, she folded the paper, glad that the job was done. "She really does like learning her catechism," Miss Holloway thought, as she checked the letter for some spelling mistakes. "Young though Mary Jane is, I think she's a Christian." By the time Mary Jane was 15 years old, she had begun to keep a diary, and her diary shows that she thought a lot about what it meant to be a Christian. December 3, 1831. "This week I've not prayed nearly enough for other people. One night I was very unkind, and I've let little things annoy me. Every day when we've had family prayers, my mind has wandered all over the place, and I've wasted a lot of time too." December 10, 1831. "I think that pride is my biggest sin, and it shows itself in so many ways. Sometimes I feel so unthankful and discontented. I often forget about God." December 17, 1831. The Bible says that we should copy Jesus, and I hardly do that at all. He was so kind, and I'm only kind to people I really like. But if anyone else had read Mary Jane's diary, they might have thought she was being very hard on herself, for the teenager was very kind and gentle and really did seem to try to live the kind of life a young Christian person should live. "I think it's time we bought you some new dresses," Lady Barnum told her youngest granddaughter. Mary Jane looked at herself in the mirror. "This dress is fine," she said, "and my other dresses will do for another year too. I've not grown quickly this last year." Lady Barnum sat down and looked at the girl. "I still think you need new dresses. These ones may still fit you, but they don't fit the fashion. You don't want to look old-fashioned at your age, surely." Although she didn't care at all about fashion, Mary Jane agreed to go to her grandmother's dressmaker. But she found it difficult to endure an afternoon of looking at cloth that didn't interest her, deciding on styles she couldn't care less about, and being pinned and tucked into boredom. It was with the greatest relief that the fitting was done and she could put on her old blue dress and go home. By the time her new dresses were delivered, she'd forgotten all about them. "I don't know what we'll do with Mary Jane," Lady Barnum commented to her husband. "She doesn't care about the things most girls her age are interested in. I often wonder what she'll do with her life." When Mary Jane was 21 years old, she went to live with her uncle, Reverend Baptist Noel. She loved sitting at the table listening to him talk. Fancy dresses didn't matter in his home. There were much more interesting things for a girl to be thinking about. "I visited a rookery at St. Giles today," Uncle Noel told her one day. "Tell me about it," Mary Jane said. "I want to know how poor people really live." Uncle Noel looked at his niece and knew she was telling the truth. He sat down beside her on the window seat and told her what he had seen. "I suppose rookeries get their name because they're very tall and narrow buildings, although it's hard to imagine anything less like a tree covered with rooks' nests. The one I visited today had over 300 people living in it, and every one of them desperately poor. Sometimes several families live in one room. I heard of one small room where 5 families lived, one family in each corner and another in the middle of the room." When someone asked how they managed, the husband of one of the corner families said that it had been fine until the family in the middle of the room took in a lodger. The poverty is terrible. But what is worse is that hardly anybody in the rookery I visited knows that Jesus can save their souls. "Is that why you helped to start the London City Mission 2 years ago?" Mary Jane asked. Uncle Noel looked at the serious girl at his side. "Yes," he said, "that's why I hope that the London City Mission will be a great success. They will employ ordinary people rather than ministers to go out to the ordinary people of London." "I'll pray for the missionaries," promised Mary Jane, and Uncle Noel knew that she would. In 1841, just 4 years after she had moved to her uncle's home, Mary Jane founded an organisation of her own. It was the St. John's Training School for Domestic Servants. As each girl came for training, Mary Jane took down her details and kept a record of the work she did, and she continued to do that for many years until over 1,000 young women had passed through her training school. Not only that, she used a lot of her own money to fund the training as well as raising funds from her friends, even when she married the Honourable Arthur Kinnard when she was 26 years old. Her interest in helping people continued. Over the years that followed, Mary Jane tried to interest her friends in the things that interested her, not the fashions that she could ever be bothered with. She sent out invitations and discussions, and the discussions were on serious topics. Her invitation for one Wednesday in May 1848 listed that the afternoon topics were as follows. Number 1, Christian education, especially for ragged and poor children. Number 2, the problems of the British colonies. 3. How to improve conditions for the people of London. 4. How to spread the good news of Jesus in Europe. The following Wednesday, her friends were invited to discuss 1. Education. 2. Emigration. 3. Young men in towns. 4. Problems of people living in the countryside. Having tea with Mary Jane Kinnard could be hard work, because she could not remember her mother. When Mary Jane's children were born, she worked hard at being a good mother. I know the fashion is only to see your children for a short time before they go to bed, she told her husband, but I won't have that in our home. They can come into my room any time without knocking. Sir Arthur looked rather shocked. You'll never have any peace, he said. They'll run in all day and night. Mary Jane smiled. I hope they do. Lady Kinnard was the kind of mother she would have wished to have had herself. Whatever she was doing, her children were welcome. Every night she prayed with them as they went to bed, whatever was going on in the house and no matter what important people were staying. Even as her children grew older, they were constantly in her thoughts and prayers. Amazingly, when her son went off to boarding school, she wrote a letter to him every single day. During the Crimean War in 1854 to 1855, Lady Kinnard became aware of a problem and set out to do something about it. I hear that the soldiers injured in the Crimea are not receiving the care they need, and many are dying unnecessarily, she told her friends. I know, one agreed. What they're in need of is trained nurses to go out there and help. But where would we find trained nurses? Asked another. We wouldn't find them anywhere, said Lady Kinnard. We'd train them here in London and send them out when they know what they're doing. A building fund was found and a home opened where young women in training would live. That was when Florence Nightingale became involved, and the two women worked together from then on. It's all very well training nurses for the Crimea, Mary Jane said to her husband, but what will happen when the war is over? I suppose they'll go home to their families, he suggested, though he was sure that that was not what his wife had in mind. Young women will still need to come to London to train as nurses or to work, Lady Kinnard thought aloud, and we could provide a home where they could live simply and safely, like the nurses' home. Talk it over with your friends, said Sir Arthur. See what they think. Lady Kinnard wrote to several friends the following day. As she still read and wrote slowly, it took her most of the afternoon, and invited them for tea and discussion. The topic was to be providing a home for young women who come to London for training or employment. A small organisation was founded, which soon joined with another and became the Young Women's Christian Association. Lady Kinnard was president. The YWCA, as it was soon called, was not an instant success. Those who believed in it had to work hard to make it work, but it did work, and over the years homes were opened in the cities as well as London. Mary Jane Kinnard didn't live to see it, but eventually the YWCA spread to many different countries and provided homes for hundreds of thousands of young women who had to move to cities to study or work. I've just heard the most awful news, Lady Kinnard told her daughter. There have been some terrible murders in Whitechapel in London. I know I'm dying and can't do anything to help the girls of Whitechapel keep safe, but you could open a home for them. Mary Jane was right. She was dying. Even in the last few days of her life, she encouraged her daughter to take over from where she had left off. So when Mary Jane Kinnard died and went home to Jesus, her work on earth went on. A place of safety was opened in Whitechapel. It was called the Kinnard Rooms.